Hi there, welcome to another episode of The Heart of a Youth Leader. Whether you're listening to this on a podcast or whether you're watching us on YouTube, it's great to have your company this week. Now, I want to ask you, what is the most important part of your work with young people? I wonder what your answer might be. And if I was to visit your youth work, virtually of course in these days, what would be the most important element that would be obvious to me? Having worked alongside lots of different churches and wonderful committed youth workers, I know that the main thing they want to do is to introduce young people to Jesus. But I can't help wondering if what we are actually doing with them is actually trying to do this at all. The experience of the past year with the pandemic and all the implications of it has resulted in many young people disconnecting from churches. In fact, in a Thrive survey we conducted amongst youth leaders, we discovered that 86% of youth leaders were struggling with this very issue of young people disconnecting from what they were doing. If the young people were growing like Jesus, I wonder, would they be leaving in the droves they seem to be? Or are they just finding a different path, a different place for them to grow in their faith? So the simple question I'm asking today is the main thing actually the main thing in your ministry? Is the main thing actually the main thing? And here are 5 questions for us to think about as we consider perhaps things that might need to change and things that we might need to implement in our youth ministry to make it as effective as possible. First question is, do I want to be remembered or do I want to make Jesus known? Oh, that's quite a hard question, isn't it? It's like a oof, hits you in the gut straight away. Am I trying to promote myself or am I trying to promote Jesus? And of course, there's a right answer and perhaps a real answer to this question. And probably most of us don't really know ourselves well enough to be able to answer the question completely truthfully. And at best is a bit of both. I've been involved in youth work for over 20 years and I've lost count of the number of extrovert, charismatic, look at me youth workers that I've encountered. Indeed, at one time it seemed to be that this was the perfect characteristic of a youth worker that churches looked for when they were trying to employ someone. Presumably with the logic that if a youth leader is engaging and attractive to young people, then they'll have more young people getting involved with their church. But is this really what our priority should be? Yes, of course we want to be liked and we want to be accepted. Who doesn't? Youth ministry is incredibly difficult if we don't do those things. But shouldn't we be attracting people to Jesus? I mentored a young youth worker a couple of years ago who was honest enough with me to say that he really wanted to be a Christian celebrity. You know, he saw himself on a platform preaching to thousands of young people. And I have to say, I admired him for his incredible truthfulness and that refreshing honesty. But equally, I was so concerned over the truthfulness of that admission. Where are you? We need to be people who don't worry about what people think about us. Don't worry about whether we are the centre of attention. You know, as long as the young people are engaging with God's church and getting introduced to Him, that's what matters. And I'm always surprised from time to time that I'll get a little message or an email or a social media post from someone who was in my youth group years ago, who just has come to faith or is still walking with Jesus and wants to just say thank you for what I did investing in them as a teenager. And it's such a blessing because I never expect it. And so when it comes, it's just like God going, Andy, don't think your labour is in vain. It's not. I'm building on what you've sown. And it's the Holy Spirit that does the growing, as the Apostle Paul tells us. Second question for us to consider is, what if things have a habit of keeping changing suddenly? You know, we were so stuck in a rut with what we were doing in our youth work. It was the same old thing, and most youth groups have been the same for a long time. There was more than a need for something new. And then the pandemic hit us and we knew we had to do things differently. And the great thing is what we're learning is that we can change quickly. Nothing is guaranteed. Nothing will keep going the same way. Just because it happens in a certain way at a certain time doesn't mean they always will do. We don't know what is going to happen next, but God does. And so are we putting our faith sufficiently in His hands? Are we putting our ministry, our lives, into His hands? The third question is, what's happening in each person's life? Not being able to gather together physically has led many of us youth leaders to spend more time contacting young people, sometimes their families as well, and contacting them individually to see how they're doing. Dropping off simple gifts or care packages, giving a quick phone call to the home, checking in with them has just proved a really useful way of knowing how young people are doing in these days. And it makes me ask the question, why has it taken a pandemic to remind us of the importance of valuing each individual teenager? We need to be doing this anyway. So let's take this when we come out of lockdown. Let's take this into our youth work going forward, the value of the individuals and how we get alongside each young person, not only when they are gathered together as a group. Our next question to ask is fun disguised as faith? Having fun is an important part of community, isn't it? And of course, it's indeed an important part of growing up. But I wonder if we've mistaken people growing in faith actually by seeing people enjoy themselves more. Did young people come to our activities pre-lockdown, pre-pandemic, because they looked forward to the next quirky game that we were putting on for them, or that they knew something funny would happen and that they would just have a good time? And there's nothing wrong with having a good time, but let's not pretend it's growing in faith. It's just growing in relationship at best. When we take a group away for a weekend, those were the days. Did people come back chatting mostly about the games and the activities they'd done? Or were they talking about the encounters with God that they'd had? Perhaps we've been using the wrong measures for success in our youth ministry. Have we been measuring our work by numbers, by entertainment, by fun, by the atmosphere? I don't know. Should we be measuring something different that measures more about faith development? And here's my final question. If you could only do one thing each week, what would you do? The pandemic has meant that we've had to stop doing so many things, which has actually been really good for a lot of us. We've been too busy for too long. What if going forward, you could only do one thing each week with your young people? What would that one thing be? What would you want to do? Then, when you've thought about what that one thing is, I want you to think about what you're doing at the moment, your current work, and think about where you see that one thing right now. Are you doing it? Perhaps you need to change your focus or at least sharpen it. Now, of course, the danger with this episode is that it may come across that I'm being hypercritical, that I'm saying all youth work has been failing, it's a fraud. That is not it at all, and I don't want you to hear that. I love what is taking place across churches, but I know, as many of you do too, that there's something not quite working in how we as God's church conduct our youth work in these days. It's not seeing more young people growing more like Jesus, and we need to change. And so my prayer is that we will be the generation of youth workers to make that gear change, to take the church to a new place in our reaching out and discipling of young people, that we won't see more young people walking away from our churches, but many, many more young people being welcomed into our churches. Go for it.